The icy wastelands of Vortis stretched endlessly beneath a dull gray sky. The wind howled like a living thing, its icy breath cutting through the hardened warriors of the Galactic Alliance, who stood near the edge of the maze, their eyes scanning the shifting horizon for any sign of the invaders who had been making their way toward this frozen world for weeks. The maze itself loomed ahead, an ancient structure of twisting frozen pathways and towering ice walls, whose secrets had eluded even the most advanced civilizations for centuries. Many had tried and failed to navigate its depths to uncover the power hidden inside, but none had ever returned alive or whole. The artifact at the center of the maze was said to be the key to ultimate control over space itself, the kind of power that could tip the balance of the war in favor of whoever possessed it. The invaders had made no secret of their intentions. Their fleet hovered in orbit, waiting to launch a full-scale assault on the maze's entrance and anyone foolish enough to stand in their way. But the Galactic Alliance had one trump card left, one final hope for victory. Sergeant Jack McAllister was the last thing the invaders expected, and yet the only thing that stood between them and victory on this desolate world. The aliens had no idea what a human could bring to the table, but Jack had a reputation even among the most ancient of species. McAllister stood at the back of the group, his face obscured by the collar of his jacket. As he stared into the distance, his breath visible in the cold, the alien warriors beside him were murmuring among themselves, their advanced technology glistening in the low light, their eyes filled with unease. They had faced countless foes in their long lives, but the maze of Vortis was unlike anything they had encountered before. They knew its traps were deadly. They knew the dangers of navigating its frozen corridors, but they had no choice. Now they had to retrieve the artifact or risk losing everything. As the leader of the alien team gave a final briefing, Jack wasn't paying much attention. He was too busy sipping his steaming mug of cocoa with a look of absolute contentment on his face. The others eyed him with disbelief. One of the warriors spoke up in their native tongue, his voice a mixture of irritation and concern. "Are you sure you are ready for this?" Human Jack looked up from his cocoa with a grin that could only be described as a challenge. "Oh, I'm ready," he said, taking another sip. "I just like to be prepared for anything." His nonchalance was almost insulting to the alien team, but none of them could deny that they had never encountered a human like Jack McAllister before. Jack wasn't just some soldier, he was something else entirely. He had a way of surviving against all odds and making the impossible seem possible. He had been through hell and back, and each time he emerged stronger, smarter, and more determined than ever. And now he was going to prove that humanity wasn't just a footnote in the galaxy's history. It was the wild card, the thing that could turn the tide of war when everything seemed lost. As the team moved forward into the maze, Jack walked at his own pace, not rushing, not showing any fear at all. The others were tense, their weapons drawn ready for anything, but Jack's only concern seemed to be keeping his cocoa warm. He stepped lightly on the ice, testing the ground beneath his feet before moving forward with ease. The ice didn't bother him, the cold didn't bother him, none of it did. He had survived worse, and he would survive this too, no matter what. The ice shifted underfoot as the team ventured deeper into the maze. The atmosphere grew heavier with each step. The walls of ice seemed to close in on them, the light from their torches casting strange shadows on the jagged surfaces that loomed around them. They moved in silence, except for the faint hum of their equipment and the occasional creak of the shifting maze. The air grew colder with every step, and the chill bit at their exposed skin. But Jack didn't seem to notice. He continued to sip his cocoa at a leisurely pace, as if this were just another walk through a park, instead of a death trap that had claimed the lives of many before them. The alien warriors eyed him warily, their sharp senses alert to every noise, every movement in the ice. But Jack was different. His movements were slow and deliberate, a stark contrast to the hurried pace of the others. It was clear they were on edge, while Jack appeared completely unfazed by the dangers ahead. In fact, it seemed like he was enjoying himself as he took in the maze's beauty between sips of his cocoa. The rest of the team moved with more caution, each step carefully calculated as they navigated the narrow corridors that wound through the labyrinthine depths of the frozen maze. They passed under arching ice structures that glowed with an eerie light, the walls lined with ancient symbols whose meanings were lost to time. Some of the alien warriors muttered nervously as they passed, but Jack merely raised an eyebrow and commented, "Looks like a great place for a vacation." His voice was light, his tone playful, yet the aliens knew there was no room for jokes in a place like this. Still, Jack's casual demeanor was both a comfort and a source of frustration for them. They were experts at surviving the harshest environments, but they weren't used to someone acting so relaxed in a place that was designed to kill. Suddenly, a low rumble echoed through the maze. The ground beneath their feet shook, and a series of loud cracks reverberated through the air. The ice around them began to fracture as if the maze itself was alive and reacting to their presence. The alien warriors froze, their eyes scanning for any sign of danger, but Jack just stood there looking at his cocoa mug as if nothing had happened. "Well, that's new," he muttered with a shrug, and took another sip of his drink. The team watched him in disbelief as cracks appeared in the walls, and the floor beneath them began to shift and tremble. Without warning, the ground beneath one of the warriors gave way, and the alien fell through the ice with a scream. The others rushed to the edge of the newly formed chasm, but it was too late. The warrior was gone. The maze had claimed its first victim. The remaining team members were visibly shaken, but Jack remained unfazed. He placed his cocoa mug in a pocket of his jacket and walked over to the edge of the chasm, peering down into the dark void below. "Well, looks like we're down one more," he said with a slight frown. "Guess I'll have to carry the team now." The alien stared at him in stunned silence, unsure if Jack was joking or if he truly believed he could handle the weight of their mission alone. But Jack had no time for their doubts. He had already started to move forward, his footsteps sure and steady as he continued his march through the maze. "Keep up if you can," he called back to them, his voice steady and confident, as he led the way deeper into the heart of the labyrinth, unaware of the dangers that lay ahead, or perhaps not caring at all. The maze continued its slow and menacing shift around them. With each passing minute, the cold was biting and relentless. The alien warriors huddled together, keeping close, but they couldn't deny the feeling of unease creeping into their minds. The walls seemed to pulse, as if alive, each corridor twisting in unpredictable directions. The air grew thicker, as though the very atmosphere was growing heavy with dread. Jack, on the other hand, walked as if he were on a leisurely stroll, his breath visible in the air, but his face unchanged and calm. He took another sip of cocoa, as though he didn't have a care in the world, while the team around him was fighting off panic. The first signs of danger came quickly. They turned a corner and were greeted by the unmistakable sounds of something large and powerful shifting in the darkness ahead. The alien warriors immediately tensed, their weapons at the ready, but Jack didn't flinch. He just kept walking unbothered, his eyes scanning the maze around them, as if he were casually taking a walk through his favorite part of town. "Anyone else here?" that he asked with a casual tone, as he glanced over his shoulder. "Sounds like we're about to meet something new." His voice was filled with an almost amused curiosity, but the aliens weren't laughing. Ahead, the shadows moved, and out of the gloom came a creature unlike anything they had ever seen. Its body was massive and covered in thick layers of ice, and Frost, its glowing eyes locked onto the team, and its claws scraped the ice as it stalked toward them. The alien warriors raised their weapons, ready to fire, but Jack didn't wait for orders or hesitation. He acted without a second thought, pulling out a small device from his belt and tossing it onto the ground with a sharp snap. The device expanded rapidly into a net of frozen energy, which crackled with blue light. The creature roared and lunged forward, but the net snapped around it with lightning speed, trapping it in place. The team watched in stunned silence as Jack walked past them without breaking his stride. "You know," he said casually as he continued forward, "I was hoping for something a little more challenging." He gave a sidelong glance at the frozen beast and shook his head. "Guess it'll have to do." The aliens gaped at him. They had never seen anyone treat a lethal predator with such flippant disregard. The net held the creature in place, but it was clear the danger was far from over. Jack's nonchalance was infuriating, and yet there was something else about him that was unnerving, something about the way he moved with such confidence, as if nothing could touch him. As they pressed on through the maze, the path seemed to narrow, the walls closing in around them, the air growing colder and harder to breathe. Jack's breath now came in visible puffs, But he didn't show any sign of fatigue. The alien team was struggling to keep up their movements more rigid, their eyes darting nervously to the shifting walls and the constant noise of cracking ice beneath their feet. "You guys okay back there?" Jack called over his shoulder, his voice laced with an unexpected amusement. One of the warriors grunted in frustration, their face a mask of stress and exhaustion. "How can you remain so calm?" they asked, their voice strained. "This place is alive. We can feel it moving with us. It wants to trap us." Jack chuckled softly, but didn't turn around. "It's just ice," he said casually. "And maybe it's trying to trap you, but I'm not planning on staying here long enough for it to succeed." He took another sip of his cocoa, as though that one simple act could give him the power to defy the very maze itself. The alien team exchanged uneasy glances, but Jack's words struck a chord deep within them. Perhaps it was the absurdity of his calmness, or perhaps it was the strange truth that they had never faced a threat quite like this before, and yet here was this human making it seem like just another day in the life. The deeper they went into the maze, the more distorted the reality of the place seemed to become. The walls stretched and shifted with each step, the passageways twisting into impossible angles. The air thickened with a suffocating cold that made it harder to breathe, yet Jack moved effortlessly, his steps as steady as ever. The aliens struggled to keep up, their bodies growing stiff as they fought off the creeping sense of panic that began to settle in. They were trained to survive harsh environments, but this was something else. This was beyond their comprehension. One of the warriors faltered, his foot slipping on the icy surface, and for a brief moment he lost his balance. The floor beneath him cracked and groaned as though in response. The alien caught himself just in time, but the hesitation had been enough. The walls trembled, and a low rumble filled the air. The maze had reacted to their uncertainty. It was alive in a way none of them could explain. The walls seemed to close in, the corridors tightening and stretching in unnatural ways, as though they were being hunted by something far greater than themselves. "Something's not right," the warrior muttered through clenched teeth, his voice tight with fear. Jack didn't even glance back. "No kidding," he said with an easy shrug. "But that's why I'm here." The aliens exchanged uncertain glances, some muttering under their breath, but none dared to speak up against Jack's unflinching confidence. The human had a way of making the impossible seem trivial, a way of making them believe that somehow he could see a path where none existed. They moved through the maze for what felt like hours, their sense of direction warping in ways they couldn't explain. The temperature seemed to fluctuate in rapid bursts. One moment, they were shivering from the freezing cold. The next, they were sweating as the air became stifling and thick with humidity. Jack's jacket clung to his body with sweat, but he still moved with ease, still taking small sips from his cocoa, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "How are you not cold?" one of the aliens asked in disbelief, their voice strained with the effort of keeping up. "The ice should be eating through you," Jack grinned. "I'm not bothered by it. I've had worse," he said nonchalantly. "Besides, I've got my secret weapon." He raised the mug of cocoa in front of him, as if to toast their perilous journey. The alien stared at him blankly, and then looked away, unsure whether they should be frustrated or simply amazed by his audacity. The maze seemed to grow darker and more oppressive as they pressed on, the sound of cracking ice echoing through the corridors like distant footsteps behind them. The creatures in the shadows grew bolder, their glowing eyes following the team's every move. But Jack didn't flinch. He continued to walk with purpose, leading the way as if he were in complete control. The alien warriors' nerves were beginning to fray. They were no longer focused on the mission, but on the overwhelming sensation that something was watching them, something far more dangerous than they could comprehend. Suddenly, a loud crashing noise came from behind them, followed by a series of metallic clangs as something large and heavy barreled through the passage behind them. The aliens spun around, their weapons drawn ready for whatever might emerge from the dark. But Jack simply turned his head for a moment, giving a half-hearted wave. "Yeah, it's right behind us," he said with an easy smile. "But we've got a little more to do before it catches up." The aliens' hearts raced as they tried to make sense of the shifting maze and the looming danger that threatened to overwhelm them, but Jack wasn't fazed by it at all. He continued to lead them through the treacherous labyrinth. As though he had already figured out how this would end, he had no intention of being trapped here, not today, not while he was still sipping his cocoa. They turned another corner, and the maze grew even more treacherous, the walls pressing in closer, the passage narrowing. As though trying to crush them, the ice cracked and groaned beneath their feet, the sound echoing like the roar of an angry beast, as if the very labyrinth itself was alive and hostile. Jack didn't seem to notice. He walked ahead, unbothered by the changes around him. The alien warriors were starting to look more worried now. Their steps were hesitant, their eyes darting to every movement of the walls and the shadows that seemed to stretch longer than they should have been. Up ahead, the passage widened, and they could see a soft, glowing light filtering through the ice. At the far end of the tunnel, the artifact was close. But as they neared the source of the glow, the maze began to react more violently. Chunks of ice fell from the ceiling, smashing into the ground and sending tremors through the ice. The air grew even colder, the chill sinking deep into their bones, and the weight of it pressed harder against their chest, like the labyrinth was trying to make them suffocate. Not much further, Jack called back to the team without breaking his stride. He took another sip from his cocoa and glanced over his shoulder. The alien warriors barely managed to keep up now, each one of them struggling to hold it together in the face of the increasingly hostile maze. "You're all looking a little pale there, guys," Jack teased, his voice filled with casual amusement. But the alien warriors could only grumble in response. They were used to extreme conditions, but nothing had prepared them for this. Their weapons barely functioned in the fluctuating atmosphere, and their once clear path was becoming a nightmare. The glowing light ahead beckoned them onward. It seemed like a beacon of hope, but as they drew closer, the danger escalated. A sharp noise split the air, and a jagged piece of ice shot up from the floor, nearly impaling one of the warriors, who barely managed to leap backward in time. They weren't sure if the artifact itself was calling out to them, or if the maze was simply turning against them in a final attempt to stop their progress. "Doesn't look like it's welcoming us," one of the warriors muttered, but Jack just smiled. "Nah," he said without a care. "It's just a little temperamental." He waved it off, as if this was a minor inconvenience and not a life-threatening situation. The rest of the team exchanged nervous glances, but Jack's confidence was starting to have an effect on them. They were starting to follow his lead, even if they didn't fully understand it. They finally reached the source of the light. The artifact stood at the center of a massive open chamber, the ice floor around it shimmering with an unnatural glow. The air seemed to vibrate with power. The artifact was beautiful in its simplicity, a small orb of crystal that pulsed with energy at its core, as if alive. But as they moved toward it, the walls of the chamber began to rumble, and the maze seemed to react to their presence. A low growl echoed through the chamber as the ice cracked and shifted beneath their feet. Jack's eyes scanned the room with a mixture of curiosity and confidence. "Well, that's new," he said as the ground beneath them began to fracture and split open. The artifact still sat there untouched, its light brighter than ever, but the room around them was turning into a death trap. The alien warriors moved to surround the artifact, their eyes alert and weapons raised, ready for anything that might come from the shifting maze. But Jack stood still, his eyes locked on the orb, with an expression that was neither worried nor rushed. "Let's just hope this thing is worth all the trouble," Jack said, taking one last sip of his cocoa. "All right, who wants to grab it?" He stepped forward with a grin, but no one moved. They were all waiting for Jack to make the first move. Despite everything they had seen up to this point, they still couldn't quite grasp what it was about this human that made him act so boldly in the face of death. Jack wasn't worried, though. In fact, he was starting to get the feeling that the maze had just given him exactly what he needed, an opportunity. The ground trembled again, and a series of ice shards shot up from the floor surrounding the artifact, like a cage trapping them in the chamber. The air crackled with static, as if the artifact itself was reacting to their presence. Jack didn't flinch, his eyes still locked on the orb, its glow intensifying as the walls around them closed and the alien warriors tightened their grip on their weapons, their faces a mix of fear and anticipation. They had been through countless battles, But nothing like this. It was as though the very fabric of the maze had turned against them, trying to keep them from claiming the prize that could change the course of the galaxy. Jack took another slow sip of his cocoa, unfazed by the looming danger. "Looks like it's playing hard to get," he said with a smirk, but his voice was calm, as though he were discussing a minor inconvenience. "Don't suppose you guys have any ideas?" He turned to the warriors, who stood motionless, eyes wide with growing anxiety. The walls of the chamber seemed to pulse, as if the maze itself was alive and aware of their intentions, and Jack could feel the weight of it pressing down on him, but he refused to let it show. The alien leader was the first to react, taking a step forward and scanning the area. "We must be cautious," he said, his voice low and urgent. "This artifact is no ordinary object. Its power is far beyond our understanding." His eyes flicked nervously to the shifting ice around them. "If we touch it improperly, or if the maze decides to retaliate, it will mean our doom." Jack didn't reply immediately. He simply looked at the orb, his expression unreadable as he weighed his options. "I don't know about you," Jack finally said, his tone light, but with an edge of determination. "But I've never been one for overthinking things." Without another word, he took a step forward toward the artifact, and immediately the maze seemed to react. The walls rumbled, and a series of jagged ice spikes shot up around the edges of the chamber, like the teeth of some massive predator ready to pounce. But Jack didn't hesitate. He moved with purpose, stepping carefully around the obstacles, as if he had already mapped out the entire chamber in his mind. The alien warriors watched in disbelief as Jack navigated the shifting ice with ease, his movements smooth and calculated, like he had been here 1,000 times before. His confidence was like a breath of fresh air in the face of overwhelming danger, and it was starting to spread to the rest of them. The leader watched Jack for a moment before silently signaling for the team to follow in his wake, their weapons still ready, but their steps now more cautious, less panicked. The closer Jack got to the orb, the more intense the power seemed to grow. The air vibrated with energy, and the ice underfoot began to shift faster, until it became a blur of motion, like the maze was trying to swallow them whole. But Jack was undeterred. He reached the base of the artifact and paused for a brief moment, his fingers brushing against the icy surface of the pedestal that held it. And then he grinned. "Here goes nothing," he muttered under his breath, and without a second thought he grabbed the artifact, its surface pulsing under his touch. Like it was alive, it hummed with energy, and in an instant the entire chamber seemed to explode with light. The walls shook violently as the power of the artifact surged through the maze itself. For a moment, everything was still, the light of the orb casting long shadows across the room. But then the maze responded. It was as though the very ground beneath them had come alive. Ice cracked and splintered in every direction, as if the labyrinth were tearing itself apart. In anger, the alien warriors scrambled to regain their footing as the ground beneath them buckled and cracked. But Jack stood there holding the artifact without flinching, his eyes locked on it with the same unyielding calm he had shown since they first entered the maze. "Guess I was right," Jack said with a smirk. "This place really does hate me." And with that he turned toward the others, the artifact glowing brightly in his hands. As he made his way back toward the group, the maze around them continued to tremble and shake. But Jack had already proven that there was no obstacle it could throw at him that would stop him. Now the artifact was in his hands, and he was ready to take on whatever came next. The maze shook violently as Jack held the artifact in his hands, its glow now blinding the air, humming with a force that made the ice crack and splinter in every direction around them. The alien warriors staggered back, their faces filled with disbelief and fear. The walls of the chamber twisted and groaned as though they were being torn apart by an unseen force, but Jack stood firm, unfazed by the chaos unfolding around him. He looked down at the artifact, its light flickering like a heartbeat pulsing in rhythm with his own breath. The power of it was overwhelming, but Jack didn't seem concerned. He raised the orb higher, letting its light illuminate the dark labyrinth around them. The air seemed to thicken, as if the maze itself were recoiling from the power it could no longer control. "Looks like we've got its attention," Jack said with a smirk as he glanced at the alien warriors who were still reeling from the violent reactions of the maze. The leader of the team swallowed hard, his eyes wide with shock and awe. "You have no idea what you've just unleashed," he said, his voice tight with panic. "The artifact is far more dangerous than you realize. If you're not careful, it could tear this entire maze apart, and we along with it." Jack didn't respond immediately. He was too focused on the artifact, still studying it, as if he were trying to understand its every detail. The glow grew brighter and brighter, until the light seemed to be coming from everywhere. The walls of the maze were no longer visible, as everything around them was swallowed by the blinding brilliance. The maze continued to tremble, but now it felt different. It was as if the walls were no longer the maze's enemy, but part of the same force that pulsed through the orb. The ground beneath them cracked open, and chunks of ice began to rise into the air, floating as though they had a mind of their own. The alien warriors scrambled to keep their footing, trying to stay on solid ground, but Jack just stood there, unbothered by the rising chaos around them. "You're not wrong about one thing," Jack said with a grin, his voice filled with dark amusement. "This place really doesn't like me." He raised the artifact higher as the ice continued to shift beneath them. "But I got a feeling we're just getting started." The alien leader stepped forward, his face now filled with a mixture of anger and desperation. "You must release it before it destroys us all," he shouted, but Jack only chuckled lightly as he took another sip of his cocoa. The absurdity of it all seemed to amuse him. "Relax, I've got it under control," he said, waving a hand, as if dismissing the very idea that he was in any danger. "It's just a little overactive right now," he said with a grin. The artifact in his hands pulsed brighter, and the ice surrounding them began to warp its shape, shifting and bending like it was alive, reacting to the artifact's power. The walls of the maze seemed to shift more violently, now like they were trying to force them out. The glow from the orb intensified, and for a brief moment it felt as if time itself had frozen. Every motion of the maze had halted. The air felt thick and electric. "Do you not understand?" the leader said, now barely able to keep his voice steady. "The artifact will not be controlled. It will consume everything if you do not put it back in its resting place." Jack's eyes narrowed slightly, the playful grin fading just a little. "No," he said simply. "I'm not putting it back. I'm keeping this thing, and I'm making sure it doesn't get used by anyone else." He turned to face the team fully now, the glow of the artifact reflecting in his eyes. "This thing is a game changer, and I'm not going to let it be used for destruction," he said, his voice suddenly filled with cold determination. The warriors stood frozen, unsure of what to do. They had never seen a human act with such reckless confidence in the face of such power. But Jack wasn't afraid. He was taking control of the situation in a way none of them had expected. The maze around them seemed to react to his resolve, the walls shaking as if sensing the shift in power. Jack's grip on the artifact tightened as the maze trembled again, but this time it wasn't the maze fighting back. It was something else, something deeper beneath the surface, a force that had been waiting for the moment when Jack would seize the power it offered. The glow of the artifact flickered and then dimmed for just a moment before it surged again, stronger than ever, as if it had been awakened completely by Jack's touch. The alien warriors could only watch in awe and fear as Jack held the artifact steady, a man on the brink of becoming something far greater than they had ever imagined, and the maze that had once been their greatest enemy now seemed to bow to him. The chamber erupted in a final violent shake as the maze seemed to exhale a final breath of resistance. The air crackled with power as the ice shifted and fractured beneath them, but Jack stood firm, his grip tightening on the artifact, the glow now pulsing with an intensity that made the walls glow with an otherworldly light. The alien warriors had retreated into a defensive formation, their weapons raised, but their expressions were a mix of disbelief and uncertainty. They had never seen anything like this before. Jack's unshakable calm in the face of such raw power was something they couldn't comprehend, but they could no longer deny it. The maze had been defeated by a single human. "Is it over?" one of the warriors asked, his voice trembling as he looked at the shifting walls and the distant rumbling of the labyrinth itself. Jack looked at the artifact in his hands, the glow slowly fading as if it were settling into a more controlled state. "Yeah, I think it is," Jack said with a small grin as he turned to face the alien leader. "You can relax now. It's not going to tear us apart unless we make it angry again." He gave a half-hearted shrug, But there was a glint of something else in his eyes now, something far more dangerous than anything the maze had thrown at them. The alien leader hesitated, then stepped forward carefully, his face unreadable as he looked at the orb. "You don't understand," he said slowly. "The artifact was never meant to be controlled. It was meant to be a power to destroy and reshape worlds." His voice was filled with fear and awe. "You may have tamed it for now, but the consequences of keeping it could be worse than you realize." Jack met his gaze unflinchingly. "Maybe," he said, his voice firm but calm. "But I'm not about to let this thing fall into the wrong hands." He glanced at the artifact once more. "I'll figure out how to use it for something better." The aliens exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to make of Jack's resolve. He was right. They had seen the devastation that the artifact could cause, and yet here he was with it in his hands, seemingly unconcerned by the vast power he wielded. But Jack wasn't interested in playing the same game they had played. The artifact was no longer just a tool for destruction. It was a symbol of control in his hands, and that made all the difference. The rumbling in the maze began to subside, the walls no longer shifting with the violent energy they had once held. The floor beneath their feet began to settle, and the air lost some of its oppressive weight. As though the labyrinth was accepting its defeat, the light from the orb flickered one last time before it dimmed to a soft glow that bathed the chamber in a calming light. Jack let out a small sigh as he lowered the artifact, his fingers still wrapped around it, but the tension in his body easing ever so slightly. "So," he said with a grin, "who's ready to leave this place behind and get something to eat?" The warriors were still staring at him in stunned silence, none of them knowing how to respond to what had just happened. The alien leader took a step forward, his voice low and cautious. "You may have won this battle, but the war is far from over." Jack nodded without hesitation. "I know it," he said, his voice serious for the first time. "But that's why I'm not letting go of this thing." He paused and looked around at the team, his eyes meeting each of theirs. "We've got a new mission now, and we're going to make sure this power doesn't fall into the hands of those who want to destroy everything." For the first time since entering the maze, the warriors looked at him, not with fear or doubt, but with a shared understanding. They didn't fully trust Jack, but they knew now that he was something else, something they had never encountered before. He wasn't just a human. He was a force that could shape the future of the galaxy, and whether they liked it or not, they were going to have to follow him if they wanted to survive. With the artifact now secured and the maze's hold broken, Jack led the team back through the winding passages, no longer afraid of what lurked in the shadows. The dangers they had faced were nothing compared to what was waiting outside the maze, but with the power of the artifact in his hands and the confidence that came with it, Jack was ready to face whatever came next, no matter what.